Closing.
A little bit of background on myself. My name is Robert Vignone. I'm a 3D modeler at DreamWorks Animation. I've been there about 2 years, and I've worked on projects such as How to Train Your Dragon 2 and Home, both due out in 2014. Earlier this year, I acquired my first 3D printer. It's a Formlabs Form 1 printer off of Kickstarter. And I'm going to tell you a little bit about some basics of 3D printers. Stereolithography printing, that's what I have. And it's resin as opposed to like plastic. There's basically two consumer level 3D printers that are available right now. There's the Form 1, which is the one I have on the left, and the B9 Creator on the right. They have slight differences in that the B9 is a projector-based UV bulb, and you can see the projector on the bottom right here. And then on the Form 1 is a laser. They run from $3,300 to $4,500 for the printer, and they can go down to 25 microns, which is pretty much as fine as you're going to get in any printer, even the $100,000 ones. Sometimes they go a little bit higher resolution, but that's about what you're going to get. So the quality bar on these ones is really high compared to them being a consumer level printer. These particular printers are great for details such as like eyebrows, hair, and just like really nice pore level detail, cloth and stuff. It is, however, pretty expensive. It's about $100 and up for a 1 liter bottle of resin. And to give you an example, this particular print probably cost me about $15 to print, and it's mostly solid, and it's a little bit hollow in the neck area. So if it's about $15, I can only print maybe, I don't know, how's my math? Maybe 10. Let's see how that is. Okay, so these printers are actually better for smaller size 3D prints. Let's say smaller would be down to this size, and even smaller. And you can go down to about 1/4 inch size print to anything up to 5 inches at a time. These prints actually tend to be a little bit more solid, heavier feeling. They feel like a clay maquette, which is actually really nice. Now you got the fused deposition modeling ones, which is the MakerBot and Ultimaker, and there's probably 50 other different types of FDM printers. These ones are, however, very much a do-it-yourself style printer. They require a lot of calibration, and you can actually build one yourself. It's like an open source market for these printers. You can build one for about $500 just to start printing stuff like this, which is the fused deposition modeling style. These are actually really great for large objects. You can print stuff about this big at one time. They're good for architectural environments, things like that. And per print cost is actually much, much cheaper. You can get a whole roll of printing material for about $30. These are, however, not as great for super fine details. So they're bigger for bigger shapes. They often leave like striations in the material, and a lot of this can be refined a little bit, and they tend to be lightweight. So they're they don't feel like as solid like a clay toy. These are sort of the 3 of the same characters, all printed on 3 different types of printers. And you can see the FDM, you can see the lines that you get. It still gets pretty good detail. These can be dialed in a little bit. And then the SLS is your objects. These are like $100,000, $200,000 printers. And these are sort of like a sand-based. The way it works is it blasts a laser into a canister of powder, and it fuses it together. It's like lightning hitting sand and making glass. And then the SLA is what I have, these guys, and that's a resin cured, and it cures with UV light. If you take the resin and put it in the sun, in 2 minutes you're going to have a rock. Last time I did this presentation yesterday, and I didn't go over supports and what supports are. My supports look like this, and you can see it on the screen. The octopus on the bottom was printed in one entire go with the support structures that come up like that. The SLS printer, you can see it pulled out of a box of powder. The kind of cool thing is that it doesn't require these kind of supports, because every time it prints, it's always filled with this powder material. And then you get an entire object that's held up by the remaining material that's not used. And then you get the makerware style, where it tends to build a lot of support structures all over the place, and you usually have a lot of cleanup work to do. So there's kind of 3 varieties there, and they all kind of have their strengths and price points. So this is a character sculpt I did maybe earlier this year, and I didn't have a 3D printer. Actually, I did it last year. I didn't have a 3D printer at the time, but when I got one, and I decided I'm going to take this character and make this my first print ever. So he was a 12-hour print. He was in the $12 to $15 cost range, and he was completely hollow all the way through the head. And this is like the ZBrush. So ZBrush is a big part of the getting it ready for print and achieving this. So you can see I built a hollow shell inside. So basically the thickness of the character was this thickness here all the way through. And the next time I tried to do another print, I did it and I made the neck too hollow, and as printing, the head fell off. So it's a trial and error on everything. This is my first one. It came out perfect. The next one, it was a disaster. Some things to be aware of when you're doing the 3D printing and preparing your model for 3D printing. Every printer has their own requirements. This particular one, I didn't really know what the requirements were, so I had to make this a single skin all the way through, so it's one continuous mesh. And when I built it, it was a bunch of different meshes. And one area that was troublesome for me is that the cloth that I built was actually a single object, and it had a lot of holes in here. So going up and cleaning all those kind of details out and making sure it fuses together was a critical part for me. And a lot of tools in ZBrush really helped facilitate that cleanup. This is what it looks like coming out of the printer. The clear one is the clear resin that I had at the time. And then I cleared up the supports using sandpaper and some other model making materials. And then I painted it gray with a Tamiya gray primer, and this is the final print that I did. So overall, I think it was a pretty good success for my very first 3D print I ever done. You can even see some of the fabric detail printed in the bust. Unfortunately, I don't have these particular prints with me. It's a 3D print show in London right now. So my next print, I decided to take it next step. So I wanted to do it and make it a little bit more complicated. So that's actually this print here. She's based off of 3 different meshes. And just some overview, I wanted to tackle clothing, making a stand, and just like having something pretty expressive. And this is the final ZBrush. You can see she's actually hollow as well, and I had to carve out using the stand to make a hole in the mesh as well. She was actually built with all separate meshes. All her teeth were separate geo, and all of that had to be combined as one continuous mesh as well. And just to point out a little thing here is like her ear was a pretty big overhang, the earlobe. And so I actually built custom supports just to make sure those printed okay. It didn't fall off while printing. When it came out of the printer, this is the final piece put together. I actually got a bottle of gray resin at the time. And okay, there you go. I got a bottle of the gray resin at the time. And the shirt is so thin that, and you guys can come look at it later after the show, but it's so thin you can actually see through it, even though it's supposed to be 100% opaque. And it comes off and on, which is pretty fun. You can see the supports that were on the shirt. I oriented the model to print in a way that it required the least amount of cleanup. And the base itself was printed without any supports, and it was basically glued to the platform, and it came out perfectly. And there's some beauty photographs of the final print. You can see the detail in the ears. All the hair came out really nice. And you can see every tooth in there, you can see it. And even her eyes. Even with 3D printing, you always want that next level of detail, and it's not quite there yet. And I really want to go in, and I wish it was wax sometimes, and I can go in there and sculpt in some extra detail in the final model. And so hopefully you guys are familiar with How to Train Your Dragon. It's a great movie in my opinion. And the modeling department at DreamWorks wanted to do a gift to our director, Dean. And one of the lead modelers, Matt, said, hey, let's do a 3D print of Stoic. And I was like, all right, let's do it. So he was 11 different pieces. He was 8 inches tall. He's composed of a bunch of custom supports, a lot of custom keys, and I'll explain what those are later. And it took over 40 hours of printing, and that's a loose estimate. It's probably more. And he was printed at the 50 micron level, so it's twice as low resolution as 25. But the thing is it's it doubles. So if you wanted to print at 25 micron, it's twice as long as the print. So his lower body would have taken 24 hours just to print from the waist to the feet. And we only had 2 weeks to put this whole thing together. So this is a couple of screen grabs of the assembly and the ZBrushing of the model itself. You can see I made a custom key for the sword going into the handle. Where the arm detached here, he actually has armbands. So I wanted to make sure that when you put the arm into the model, it would stay and be the right orientation. And it would lock in place, and you would also not see where they sort of joined up. This is sort of the progress that I went through building this character once I had all the prints done. You can see that he was made of, I printed in clear this time. Clear is a little easier to work with, and I write about this stuff on my blog, but you can see that I did a primer gray on him as well, and this is with the arms attached is on the left, and I also glued the sword in. And then the lower half of the body is in clear still, and there's a couple holes in the skirt area that I had to manually clean up. And then the arms came out pretty perfect, and they were assembled later. And there's the final 3D print that I did of Stoic. And just to identify some parts, like for example, the sheath here was a separate part that was glued on. The sword, his 2 horns, and his entire cape was also one single print. The base was 2 separate pieces that were glued together. And let's see here. I think that's it. There's probably a couple more in there. These are some close-up shots. You can see all the detail in the cape came out. Those things are really sharp. You'd probably stab yourself if you touch it too much. And even the blade is almost razor sharp. You have to be careful. And the spikes on his armbands are pretty sharp as well. And so now I'm going to go through some steps I took in ZBrush, some things I learned, and I'm going to demo for you some of those tools. This is a little trick I learned a long time ago. One of my favorite things to turn off in ZBrush is the deep shadow. It tends to create a depth in your model that it makes things look deeper than they really are. So I usually turn that off when I'm working, so you get more of a true sense of what your sculpt actually looks like. So I'm just going to show you kind of like what the model was built out of before I prepared it for 3D print. I'm just going to isolate a couple sections here. So you can see the scarf was done, and that only the front is really visible. And is one continuous mesh, and Dynamesh was really great for building this. I think it was made out of a sphere and then retopologized. This is the coat that I made, and I did this model as a bust, thinking that it would just be a render or something before I did the 3D print. So I even put all kinds of fabric detail in here as well. And all of this, even some of this managed to come through in the final 3D print. But you can see that this mesh is completely hollow and it has no thickness to it. It's not closed off. And that, if you send this to Shapeways, they would send it right back to you. And these are the eyeballs, just punch them in. And then the head sculpt. So, he's really meant to be viewed from front on, but he works, there's some sloppiness in the neck, but he holds up pretty well. And so all together, he comes together, and I was like, okay, I'm gonna go and hit print. But from what I've heard online about what I need to do, I was like under the impression that I need to make this one continuous mesh. So I started to look at doing that, and when I just grabbed the whole thing and hit Dynamesh, it was a disaster. There's holes all over the place. And so I was like, okay, I need to take this step at a time. So one of the key things I found is that when these the sculpted cloth terminates into there's all these little holes. And if you Dynamesh this, it's just gonna shoot out all over the place. So just going in here, instead of getting ahead of yourself, using your move tool, and hold on, I gotta set my hotkeys real fast. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, and 6. Okay, there we go. I highly recommend customizing your ZBrush hotkeys. It makes you so much more efficient when working.
Not great quality.
So a big part of it was actually just pulling a lot of this stuff forward and closing off these holes. Because when you want to Dynamesh this piece together, you want this all to be nice and continuous. And so you got to kind of modify your design. It's going to be a give and take process. And sometimes you want to pull this stuff back, and you're going to have to pull these forward. And you really got to get in here and close this stuff off. And even if you have to pull it in all the way, you're never going to see that. This guy's like this big. If you're going to print out something gigantic, you might have to print this in separate pieces if you want to be that critical of it. But yeah, you got to be comfortable with modifying your design a little bit to make this compromise to make it printable. So I'm not showing you guys anything new here. You know, it's the basic move brush. But the important thing is closing off these gaps so you don't create yourself more trouble later down the line. The next thing I'm going to show you is, let's see here, I'll do it with this guy. So I had the head sculpt done, and I had a pair of eyes here. And they're just spheres, and then the head as well has a container back there. It's the mesh is sealed behind the eyeball. And then if I would go and Dynamesh this together, I was assuming that the eyes would nicely transition into the rest of the skin. But that was not the case. So I'm going to merge this product down. Merge down. Yep, let's do it. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and Dynamesh this tool together, and I'm going to keep it pretty low resolution just to keep the savings in time. And let's go to Dynamesh, and I had some divisions, so no geometry. All right, there you go.
You want to thread them like so actually would work?
All right, so it's going to transfer my details over to the new Dynamesh. It's going to get a little low resolution. Even if you do that, always make a duplicate of your existing sculpt so you can always reproject back just to bring those details back. But to save time, I don't really care about that. So when I first did this, I was like, this is great. It worked perfectly. And to show you, I'm going to hide this section here. And this eye actually came out pretty great. Let me go ahead and turn on double-sided here. Under display, oh, no, not brush. Display properties, double. Okay, so actually, hold on. Let me hide this other half first.
The material's a lot lighter, huh?
Spacebar, you can reposition your mask in case you draw it wrong. It's a great thing.
We didn't hollow it out.
So this eye came out pretty perfect. It's not creating any kind of negative surfaces, but the other eye came out bad. And this is one of those things that you got to watch out for because it'll mess you up. It created this big internal balloon surface, which was a pain in the butt. And if you print that, it's kind of a crapshoot whether or not it'll print. So I took the time to make sure all this kind of stuff was gone. So an easy way to do that for me is using polygroups. So I just mask away all the stuff that I do want to keep until I narrow down just that little section of mesh. And I'm going to switch over to my select lasso here. Select lasso. Okay. There you go. Oh, wrong one. Come on. Yeah. So once you mask away all this area, and I'm going to be really sloppy here, you can create a polygroup of the area that you want to get rid of. All right, so that's the area I want to get rid of. So I just jump up here to poly groups. It says group visible, and now that one I'm going to throw on polyframe just to make sure. Bring it back out of the mesh. So I have the entire character green, and I'm going to hit him, and that's going to go away. And my other eye had a poly group on there. That's fine. I'm going to go ahead and hide this one. Oh. Invert, and then I'm going to re-Dynamesh, and that part is all going to go away. Actually, no, sorry, I'm not going to re-Dynamesh. I'm going to say delete and delete hidden. Let's see, geometry, modify topology, and delete hidden, and then it goes away. So that's you really got to like chunk away at stuff and work a little bit at a time before you just sort of jump ahead and try to Dynamesh your whole character together. So I'm going to jump over to the dancer character. So this is the shirt that was done. It's very thin, and she was actually, it was modeled on top of her, but she still penetrated through a little bit. So using the Dynamesh, I was able to extract certain cuts to fit around her body perfectly. And that was really important. So the shirt actually fit right on top of her body here. So they, anytime I might have mistakenly put the shirt through her torso, I can use her body as like a boolean basically, and cut it out. I'm going to show you just kind of that exact process with her lower torso here. So I hope a little bit of CG nudity doesn't bother anybody. I pre-apologize. So we have the bottom here, and then this is the piece that I wanted to use to cut out.
Yeah, barrels doing.
So the process I do is first, before you merge anything together and start Dynameshing, I always make a copy so I duplicate my subtools off. And let's see here, duplicate. So I have the base duplicated, and I'm going to duplicate her bases. Oh, so this is the final one, just so you know. Yeah, so that's the final. And a key thing for doing these bases, or anytime you make a key, is you always got to give yourself a little wiggle room in that you want to sort of cut out a little bit more space than you're going to need. So what I use for ZBrush to do that is I go into I'm going to hide everything except for those two. Hold on. There you go. So you go to this subtool here, and we're going to inflate using the deformation tools. So in here, and I found about 2 to 3 is a good inflation amount. And you just tap there and hit 3, and you're going to see it grow just a little bit. And every printer has a margin of error when printing, so it's better to sort of fill in with some epoxy or putty than to not have your piece not fit at all and have to reprint a $15 part. So once I do that, going back into your subtool and hit the little, I don't know, I call them 2 moons, and then we're going to merge these tools down. So let's see, merge down. Here we go, merge down. And now these are two tools together, and now this piece is going to clip out when I Dynamesh this tool. So go to your Dynamesh menu. I just learned this recently, turn on groups when you're doing that, and I should be able to draw my mask, and hopefully this works the first time. There you go, I cut it out. It's nothing special, but now we have a plug that's going to fit perfectly on our other mesh here. You can see that we have a little bit of give in there. Even though it looks like a lot in 3D space, it's not going to be a lot. This thing does not come out. Like, you have to twist it, and then there it is. So, and it leaves the paint behind. But I didn't epoxy this in place just to give it, just so you can see how it kind of comes together. Let me turn her shirt back on, in case there's children present. Some of the other challenges is her hair. Her hair is built out of a series of one-dimensional planes, and using a unified skin instead of Dynamesh was pretty critical. I'm going to jump over to Stoic and show you some of those tools. So I'll show you guys the final Stoic 3D model that was done. The model itself was not done by myself. It was done by a lot of people actually at the studio. It's an evolutionary character, so it constantly gets a little refinement over the course of the movies. This character is about, the final file when I was preparing it was about 1 gigabyte. And it was very challenging. And even though I was sad to see the 3D print go, it was kind of a relief. So I'm just going to go break out some of these parts, and you can kind of see what I did. And then I'll reproduce some of these keys for you. So the horns were, this is a production model. So this is actually the model in the beginning, the one that we're using to render. So you can see that the horns have their own little keys here for that. And you can see I did the exact same process that I showed you earlier to give it a place to sit. So when you plug it in, you know where to glue. The same thing with the cape. This is actually the cool part. So the cape itself crashed through the geometry a lot on his back. But when I finally made the piece, you could see that, let me isolate. You can see that all these little cuts here. I used his body in its entirety to slice away any areas of the cape, so when the cape gets glued onto the body, it fits perfectly. And I did the same technique where I inflated the mesh a little bit. When a print goes, it does it exactly layer by layer. So it's like a bunch of sheets of paper that get cured. So a thing that you have to think about is overhangs. And this is my first one that I did of the character. And this is the size of his torso. And you feel free to come up and hold it and touch it and kind of look at it closely, but you can see his arm completely failed to print. His arm messed up here, it like slid off to the side. It was kind of a nightmare, and it made me really sad to see this happen. He was mostly hollow, and some things actually turned out pretty great, like the front of his beard. It's actually really detailed. This part of his mustache on the left completely failed to print, and that's why I had to do it over again. And so I went back in, and on this mesh itself, on the beard itself, I went in here and created custom supports so that when the layer goes, it builds the beard out at the same time. So eventually the supports are coming up and the beard is coming, and they kind of meet together at a junction. And that's what you kind of got to visualize when you're slicing up your model and orienting it in the 3D software for printing. So I built all these little supports. These are more like just in case supports because there's no way to tell whether or not they're going to print. So, and I'm still experimenting with the best process for this exact thing. But I built custom supports for this section here. Let me isolate his upper body for you so you can see that. And you can see that I made keys for his arms. And there's some more supports back here. Actually, I got to turn those on. Those are on another layer. These supports here. So it doesn't have to be pretty. It's going to look, you know, rough and dirty. And I made also the supports to go out to his hair. So he was actually kind of printed at an angle. So as these go out almost diagonally, it's meeting in, and then the back of the hair came out fine. You can see the inside of his arm here has the negative shape cut out, and you can see where his arm would plug right in. And this one was actually a little tight, and this is the 2 inflation that I did. So I'm thinking I'm going to go to 3 from now on. I took a little sanding to get it to fit and plug into his arm, but it was still successful. But next time, I think, just to be safe, I want to give it a little bit more space. But you can see all this stuff meets right in there. And like I said, this was a production model. All this was separate geometry at the time. And so I used Dynamesh to sort of seal everything together. And I can't stress enough, don't just grab everything in Dynamesh. You're going to create more problems than solutions. So I grabbed these spikes, and I grabbed the main part of the arm, and I Dynamesh those together, and I check it out, make sure it's okay. Then I go on and do all the straps and bolts, and I Dynamesh that. Okay, those worked great. And then I added his arm. So I'm going to actually do the arm demo for you guys right now after I show this, the base here. The base was all modeled separately in polygons and then brought together. And let me zoom, alt-click that so I find it. And in order to save on resin costs, something you have to think about is making things hollow. Hollow out when you can, but don't be too, I don't know, don't do it too much, or else you might, like I said, create more problems. This is the first girl that or not the first one, but this is the girl I made completely hollow, and her head fell off as well. And another one, the neck was too thin, and that head fell off. And then finally I got a successful one, a really big one, and I was happy. And I basically made this part solid, and then she was hollow down the neck. What happens when you're making a mesh completely hollow is you're creating different overhangs that you're going to have to print out as well. So you might actually have to make internal supports for the hollow section. So I always tend to do a nice smooth and sort of organic shape, never something that's really sort of flat or straight, because the printer, if it ever has to print a straight line outwards, it's probably going to print it so thin and it'll fall. And when it falls, the whole print's going to be a failure. So you can even see inside of here all of these little artifacts. I was really worried at the time that wasn't going to print. It printed okay. So like I said, art and science together. You think it's going to be bad, and it turns out to be good, and you think something's going to be really easy, and it completely fails on you. So once I printed out these 2 sections, I made a, let me isolate. The cool thing is, sorry, come on, there you go. The cool thing is now that I know that hole size, I can make I made a plug that fits exactly in between those 2 that gave it a guide, so when they put it together, it wouldn't move, and then I could epoxy the whole thing in place. And lastly, to give this bottom part weight in the final model, or the final print, I filled it with a 2-part epoxy resin. I don't even think that's a real thing. I think it says 2-part resin, and it cures by chemical reaction. So that was the kind of the final ZBrush print model. And you can see that it actually had these holes in it that came out okay. The printer decided to add a few more holes in there that I had to end up cleaning up by myself. So yeah, always expect a little bit of cleanup and just be happy when it doesn't happen. So I'm just going to show you the process of sort of, this is the topology of the top half of the character that I sort of already sliced off. And this is the armband here. So the armband has been Dynamesh together. Actually, only part of this has been Dynamesh together. These are still separate. So the first step I'm going to do is Dynamesh this whole arm together. And I'm going to go ahead and combine the, I'm going to go ahead and Dynamesh this part together first as one giant mesh. Sticking around 1,000 to 1,300 is probably okay. Like I said, you can always duplicate off your subtools and reproject your detail later back if you need to. So in terms of the demo time, I'm going to keep it really low res for us to just keep it speedy. So that was like instantaneously. And don't worry about the detail loss. You can't even tell in the final 3D print. The next step is actually the arm. It needs to be cut in half. And so I took the time yesterday to create 2 polygroups of where these 2 meshes are going to meet. So basically the hand and the arm are going to become one piece, and inside of this is going to become another one. So I always like to duplicate off the mesh, the one I'm working with, in case I screw up. And I'm going to go ahead and isolate this part, and I'm going to just delete hidden on this geometry here. Modify topology, delete hidden. What did that say? I think it has subdivision levels. Okay. Delete lower and delete hidden. So now that is its own subtool by itself, and it goes in, and it ends somewhere in here, but I'm worried about that because this mesh, I took the time to make sure it created a nice tight seal. So now that when I merge these 2 down, this is going to combine into one single mesh here. So I'm going to go and, let's see, what am I doing? Okay, merge down. Okay, merge down. Now these guys are together. It created 2 polygroups. I don't really care about that, but I'm going to just make sure and group visible so it's one single thing. And then jump over to Dynamesh. There we go, Dynamesh, and redraw. So there you go. Now we got the hand part of the model. And I don't really have to worry about the inside, but I'm going to just double check and hide a section. Make sure there's no weird overhangs going on. And I already did this 50,000 times earlier, so we're pretty much good to go. So we can see it's pretty clean. Even though these go pretty deep, it doesn't really matter. It's not going to hurt your printer if you have a Form 1 or a resin-based printer. My experience is only around the Formlabs resin-based printer, so don't take this knowledge and apply it to the MakerBot, because it has its own set of rules, and those are all things that we all have to learn together. So I'm going to jump back up here, and I'm going to isolate this section here. I'm going to delete that hand, but I'm going to duplicate that arm real fast, and I'm going to delete that section that I just hide though. So let's see here. Delete lower, and then modify topology, delete hidden. So basically now what I did on this mesh is it's going to have a hole in it when I hide it. It's all sealed. So the easiest way to fill this hole instead of trying to re-Dynamesh is if you go into the modify topology drop-down menu, you can just say close holes, and it's going to build a piece of mesh that's just going to fill that area. And it doesn't really matter that it has some contour to it, because we don't care about that. This is going to the printer. So I'm going to go ahead and make a new poly group and just group all this stuff together, just in case. And I'm going to do the same process to the other hand later, or not today for you guys, but I'm saying I did the same process to the other side as well. It probably took me about a week of ZBrushing, 2 to 4 hours a night to sort of go through all these things. And like I said, this is the first big multi-part print that I've ever done. And so it was a lot of work, and it was a lot of learning involved. So now we have a section here. So I'm going to turn on transparency. We can see that there's a little bit of overhang in here, and it goes inside. And that's exactly what you want. And so what we're going to do is we're going to clip away using this body sort of a hole for that to go into. And then once we make that hole, we're also going to create that, that little square key. And I usually add the key before I chop out that hole. So I'm going to go and use the brush insert. So if you hit the BI, it grabs the first letter of the name of the brush is the insert cube. And I'm just going to draw that on top. And just kind of pick an orientation. It doesn't really matter. Draw that on there. That's cool. I learned to tend to favor to let it go in a little bit further than you think. I was actually a little too shallow on the ones on the horns. And so if I were to do that over again, I would actually make sure it goes out further. So this is actually a pretty good distance for this part. So I'm going to group all of this together. Geometry, let's see here. Polygroup first. And group visible. And then geometry. I'm going to Dynamesh this character first. And actually, just to save time, I'm going to duplicate this first. Always duplicate, so you have a backup. And the Dynamesh process tends to take a little bit of time. So the smaller piece of mesh that you can use to clip out areas, the better, and the faster it's going to go. So I'm going to delete that other half, and then go to the geometry again and say delete hidden. Now I'm going to go to the subtool and make sure that's not masked, and move to the bottom, and then make the inverse. And then I'm going to go down to the deformation again and go to the inflate tool. And I'm going to go to 3. So it just inflates everything along its normal a little bit. And we're going to go do the same process again and make sure that little moon is turned on. And then we're going to select that tool and merge down. And then now that I think this is already a Dynamesh anyways. But if not, I'll have to turn it on, Dynamesh. And then now it's going to clip it. Oh, sorry, I got to turn on group. Clip it. There you go. You got a nice internal mesh here that cut out the socket for the hand. And this entire character was just basically the same process over and over again. So the way you want to really break down your model is sort of start Dynameshing big pieces together and start thinking about where you can slice things up and hide where those things are going to rejoin together later on. Does anyone have any questions I can answer? Yeah. So he asked if there's like a standard of support shapes to use. There actually is not. You basically can make a 2, and what I do is, let's see here. I'm going to go ahead and just create a mesh here. So I'm going to append a cylinder. So a lot of these start off as cylinders, and using the transpose tool, I'm going to turn transparency off. So using the transpose tool, I'm going to rotate this. Oops, sorry, I got to go to the right tool. So a lot of the times you're going to have to build these supports. And I actually made a library of supports that are available to me that I kind of reuse over and over again. So you don't want to make them too long or too skinny. So that's one thing to think about. Draw a mask here. There you go. So I'm going to elongate this to build a prototype support. And I usually just jump into Dynamesh real fast and Dynamesh this guy. Keep it really low. That's probably not even low enough. There you go. And a typical support will be a continuous thickness all the way through. And this is really rough and dirty. I normally have a very straight one that I work with. But the ends of them tend to come to like a point. Because what this does is they create little contact points. So you can basically pinch these all like that. And using a planer brush, just bring them to a point. And these don't have to be clean. You don't want to spend all your time doing this kind of stuff. So you want to kind of pre-make all these shapes. And there's probably even cleaner ways to do this. But basically, these come to like a nice point like that. And then these guys get scaled down. Go really small. There you go. Really small. So you can see this character in ZBrush is actually quite small. And I'm just going to stick this in here. So a section like this, if you were to print this in a way that it came out layer by layer this way, it's going to get to here, and then it might have an issue printing that section. So you're going to have to make this guy come around and give it a support. That's going to come in. And I would give it the same kind of small contact point on one side. And there you go. So if you hold control, you can mask while you transpose, and you can just draw that up and pull it over. And use your brush to straighten this out. So Dynamesh and straighten this out. And then now you want to go in here and just basically make this kind of small. And just make sure it sits in there just ever so slightly. Because what happens when you break that off, you don't want to break off the entire tip of your model. And so this octopus here, he was printed as one go. And even though I had supports that were custom all the way in here, they came to such a tight point that I was able to snap them off without breaking off these tips. I was actually impressed that actually worked, because I thought that thing was going to be a mess. So yeah, you want to be very liberal in sort of how you make supports. The more is okay, but just make sure that these kind of come to a point at the bottom before touching. So that's pretty key. And I have a library of supports that I use where I could just draw them on, so I don't have to mess around with doing all this kind of stuff every time. So that's basically a support. I'd probably make it thinner, even thinner. Yeah. Yeah, so something like that. So that would be your basic support, and you just do a bunch of those. And then once you make one nice one, you can just duplicate it over and over again. So the next step on this character was to combine the blade handle. And I just went in here to make sure that his fingers overlapped for the most part. And it was actually pretty clean. There's some holes here on this side. And I actually didn't really worry about that too much. If you wanted to take the time to go in here and pull this area up into the handle itself, you can. But you know, it was pretty successful. And this is one other thing you have to worry about Dynameshing, is that if two surfaces are too close together, it's going to try to bridge those. So this is one aspect where I might Dynamesh the hand into the body and then make sure that I take the time to clean up that seam where the two fingers might be merging. It's a pretty long process to get that perfect, so I don't have time to demo that part for you right now. But in the end, all the fingers were separate, and it worked out fine. The blade itself was flat here, and I wanted to give it some support as well. So the way I did this particular one was actually a really cheap way, is I just go in here and mask out a section. And invert your mask by clicking outside there. And then grab your move tool and just drag it out. Drag it out. And then I created a thing. And then I also turn on the handle, turn on transparency, just so I can see what the hell I'm doing. And I just drag this right in there. Smooth this out a little bit on both sides. And then I'd go and hit that blade with Dynamesh real fast. So apparently it already is a Dynamesh, so I'm going to lower that and go ahead and hit it. And then smooth out that area. Dynamesh. And I'm a little low here. All the stuff that I did for the final thing, I do it at a higher resolution, as high as I can, to try to preserve it, but in order to keep the demo short. So I just pull this in here, make sure it goes right in. And then that same process that I showed you earlier, just extracting areas, I'd inflate this sword a little bit and then print out both pieces. And then I finally assembled them.
Is it not smooth? Did you have to sand them?
He asked, do I need to sand these pieces to get them that smooth? Usually no. Most parts come out 100% smooth, which is the great thing about resin-based printing. The caveat to that is when you do that, when you print with resin, you're always going to have support structures to clean up. So you generate problems, but then you also get a lot of good areas as well. So whenever you print out your model, you always want to print out the supports to be touching stuff you care about less. So I care about her face. I wouldn't do all the supports like this. It'd be a nightmare to clean up. So she was printed like that, and the back of her hair is really ugly, so don't look at that. But basically the supports were like this, and she was printed at an angle, something like this, on a much bigger platform, and she just lifts right out. And I have a pretty cool video. I did a time lapse that sped up about 6,000 times of this process happening. So I'm gonna go and just show you the Stoic hair. A lot of us have a library of 3D models that we've done in the past, and as more and more people get 3D printers, you're gonna be like, I wanna print my stuff. Chances are you did not build it with thinking about 3D printing. So I'm gonna turn off transparency, and a production asset such as this is a perfect example of what was not built for 3D printing. So all these meshes are open at the back, they're all intersecting, and if I go and hit this thing with Dynamesh, it's just an absolute nightmare. So one of the things that saved me when I did this is actually using the uniform skin. It's kind of an older tool, it's not really used anymore, but what it did is it sort of does a point cloud mesh over everything on the exterior. And it's going to take a while to do that, but I'm going to do it at a really low resolution so you can kind of just see what happens when I do this mesh. And it actually makes it a separate subtool, so I'm going to keep it low just to process it real fast for you. So in this case, if I just hit Dynamesh, there's so many internal surfaces that it's going to be messed up. So this is the really low resolution version. I'm going to actually jump back to a higher one just to see if I can get it a little bit more detail without killing the computer. So the faster the computer you have, the better for this stuff, because it's all processor going. So if I were to redo this, I'd probably do a few sections at a time instead of trying to do the whole thing in one go. And this is like one of those things you just try and do it again until you figure out the sweet spot where everything sort of works. So let's see what this. So that's a little bit better. So I'm just going to use that for now and kind of give you an idea of what my process was, even though it's going to look ugly. So that's the real beard. I'm going to append in that other subtool that I just made, the slightly better one. So that's it. And then we're going to merge this. I'm just going to move this down underneath the beard. So there's the bad one and there's the good one. So I'm going to select the uniform skin that I made, and then turn on visibility and turn on, let's see, I lost it. There you go, project button in the subtool palette. You're going to go and hit project all. And it's not going to get everything, and it's going to look a little low res. And I'm going to turn up the distance a little bit and do it again. And then sometimes I go and hit all this stuff with the smooth, and then I'm going to divide it. And then I'm going to hit project all again. And I'm going to smooth a little bit, and probably going to hit project all again. So there's certain areas that you're going to have to go into that are just not working, like this one. And don't be afraid to just smooth this out, push that in. You may have to sacrifice some details to get this to look like the shape that you want to print, and try to just let go that maybe all of these little things are not going to print for you. But overall, this process took a while, but I was actually able to get it to look like 90% like the beard model. So you got to keep on subdividing and keep going. And let me isolate this section here. So there it is. You can see there's a little bit of cleanup work that I'm going to have to do. Instead of shooting this part in, it's actually leaving it hanging out there. So I'm going to have to go and sculpt that and push it in. One of the cool tools that I found for help sort of bringing all these polygons that are shooting all over the place is the polish tool. So I'm going to go in the deformation tab and just throw a polish on it. And all these things are going to go, whoop, and it's going to smooth it all out for you. You're not going to sit there and try to clean it all up. And sometimes if the polish one gets rid of too many details, you can try these other ones like polish by feature. See how it retains those edges a lot more? So, I mean, that's actually not bad. For something that's going to be printed this big, you know, that would actually look pretty good. And if you spent maybe a couple hours going in here cleaning up those big spikes and going in and sculpting and smoothing stuff like this out, the trim dynamic brush is really awesome for getting these planes back. So it's like kind of like a polish brush, but I don't know. It's one it's probably been there forever since ZBrush 1. but it's kind of one of my new favorites for polishing off stuff, and it's sort of like a flatten, and it keeps your nice crisp edges. And I like it too for planering out edges like that. So it's actually a really nice brush. So be sure to check that one out. So just to give you guys an idea of what it looks like to see this thing be 3D printed, I have a video that I produced maybe 6 months ago. And I'm just going to play it. So that's that Sherlock model. And normally there's some really cool music going on right now, so just start beatboxing or something. So this is all sped up really fast. So there's the resin going in. I'm checking to make sure I don't go above that fill line. And this platform lowers down and fills and goes all the way down to the base. And then the laser's underneath that's attached to a mirror, and it's reflecting and then hitting and then curing the bits of the resin. And then this thing just grows right out of the resin trough. And I apologize for not having this print with me, but all of these are made the exact same way. You can see that one half of the resin tray is dipping. Basically what's happening, and it cures a layer of resin, and then it peels it away. So it does this action, and that layer is now basically stuck to the layer before it. And it does that over and over and over and over again. And so you have your final print. It came out clear. I did some post work to get rid of that. Actually, I'm going to pause it if I can. Nope, missed it. Nope, missed it again. There you go. So you asked if there's any sanding involved. This is what I'm talking about when you get those support contacts. So if you make them too small, the print's going to fall off while printing. If you make them too big, you're going to have a hell of a lot of cleanup work. So it's a little bit of a balance, but that's how much cleanup I had on him. Because it's a nice flat surface that I had to clean up, it was actually not a big deal. And then the final product, you guys saw it earlier, but if anyone's joining us right now, you'll see a photograph of the final print at the very end. So there's my paint box. I did the cleanup work and sanding, the initial prime, and then the final print done. And yeah, no, that's pretty much it. If anybody has any questions, we're going to have a sign up. We're going to be launching a 3D printing for artists website pretty soon. So you can see my partner Ed over here in the corner, and give him your email if you're interested and want to see more 3D prints from a lot of other artists that are doing the same kind of stuff. Thank you everybody for coming.